I've never heard this explanation before. I've been depressed for 30 years. I've had meds for 30 years. No one's ever told me that emotions have functions.
I'm Adam Hunt, and this is the Evolving Psychiatry podcast, rethinking mental health through an evolutionary lens. Share it with the people who matter, like it if you like it, subscribe if you want to hear more.
Dr. Hans Schroder, PhD, is a clinical assistant professor in the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Michigan. Dr. Schroder received his BS, MA, and PhD in clinical psychology from Michigan State University before spending a couple of years at McLean Hospital / Medical School. So the reason that Dr. Hans Schroder, is here today is because he's interested in the larger narratives and the beliefs about mental health problems and treatment and what the psychological effects and treatment decision-making consequences of those beliefs might be, especially thinking about comparing biogenetic messages, so messages about neuroscience and genetics and how they cause mental health and mental illness problems. Questions of how those explanations affect beliefs and distress. And then also, and the reason that I invited him on the podcast, he's been looking at how the changing the framing of mental illness, moving away from these biogenetic explanations, and especially talking about functional signals and looking at the sort of functional side of mental health. He's actually the first person I know of, and I think I should know because I've looked into this for many years. He's the first person I know who's really gone and studied how framing depression as a functional signal, as the paper is titled. He's the first person to go and actually test this in a really rigorous, nice way that we'll talk about a little bit later. But yeah, it's great to have you on, Hans, because I've talked to so many people on the podcast as well about what evolutionary psychiatry and this kind of reshaping of understanding mental health means to people. And there's always been this intuition that it will help people. And you're the first guy to test it. So it's so cool. And I'm really happy that you're doing this work. Thank you for coming.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, Adam. I'm excited to be here and talk with you.
Super. So yes, it would be great if you could just talk a little bit more about your background. You're a clinical psychologist. When did you first kind of come into thinking about functional explanations and also evolutionary psychiatry specifically? And what's your background here? What was your journey?
Yeah, it's kind of a long story, but so as an undergrad at Michigan State, I was a psychology major and an anthropology minor, actually. And so I've always had this evolutionary interest. I got obsessed with Neanderthals for a long time. I was making PowerPoints about isn't this so cool, human evolution? But I joined a lab, a research lab, a clinical psychology lab, and I got interested in this concept. I don't know if you've heard of this fixed versus growth mindsets. It's really big in educational psychology, developmental psychology. It's basically the idea that we have different beliefs about how much we can change our abilities, like intelligence or personality. And I was reading that if you talk a lot about genetics, like the genetic endowments of intelligence, genetic contributions to things like personality, people will automatically assume that you can't change those things. And I thought that was really interesting. So we did a couple studies on these mindsets, and I really increasingly got interested in how mindsets might apply to mental health. So because we talk about mental health as genetic and biological conditions all the time, and I was thinking, well, are we saying that we can't change these things? What's the deal here? We're sending mixed messages to folks. So I got really interested. I've really always been interested in how we should talk about these things. What are the implicit messages that we're sending when we talk about things like a chemical imbalance, for instance? Those kind of the background that I had in undergrad, and I stayed at Michigan State for grad school, just continuing to study these things. And then it really shifted for me when I went to internship in Boston and worked with patients with really bad depression who had been told for years that they have a chemical imbalance, a genetic disorder, a broken brain. These are direct quotes from patients that I worked with, and was really interested in understanding how people's mental models of their symptoms contribute to their hope for recovery, essentially. So that's kind of my very quick version of that.
Yeah, it seems so intuitive. And I know that actually Dan Nettle has started doing more research into how genetic explanations are interpreted by people. And yeah, it's really hard to get away from the genetic is fixed mentality. I don't know. It's almost like we assume that, but it's really, really not the case that if a condition that is 100% heritable can actually not lead to the phenotype, as you call it. The good example here is the ability to tan. Like you can have skin which would tan and go really dark under extreme sunlight, but if you're never actually in the sun, then you will never show a tan at all. It's a purely genetic trait. It's very simple. We understand it, and many of the differences between people are caused by these genetics. But actually, the environment really, really matters, and that's something that doesn't get picked up in this kind of genetic versus environmental discourse, because everyone's like, "Oh, that's the fixed bit," and you can then, "Oh, it's whatever. ADHD is 80% heritable, so it's 80% fixed." I've seen this talked about loads, but it's really not the case that something that being quite genetic or heritable means that it can't be fixed. And and also depression and anxiety, which are the main traits you look at, right, are like the least heritable conditions anyway. So yeah, it's bizarre that we're still using the genetics explanation as something which is supposed to be helping people. It's weird. But I assume that in your clinical practice, you meet people who come in with different presumptions about what their brain is, and do they, how do you think they think about that? Do some of them actually kind of like it? Because there's good research showing that it's you experience less blame if you can't blame someone for the genetic condition. You feel sorry for them. You're like, oh, that sucks for you, sorry. But yeah, like what do you see in patients, and did you kind of see this, that people who were thinking of themselves as genetically broken or whatever have less hope for recovery and they don't change their lives as much? Or what's your perception of this?
Yeah, this piece is fascinating. And I think, just to back up a little bit, I think all of these messages and framings and even campaigns all come from benevolent, motivations and intentions. We're trying to decrease blame. We're trying to get people more interested in treatment. These are noble causes. And I didn't know about the tanning thing. That's fascinating. I don't think I have any genetic predisposition to be tan myself, but even when I'm in the sun. But it's so it's really interesting. These the research definitely shows that talking about mental distress, including depression, as a biogenetic or chemical imbalance condition does decrease personal blame. It takes away pretty much a lot of blame for having depression. It's not my fault. It's my chemicals' fault. It's not my fault. It's my brain's fault, or my neural circuits' fault, or my genetics' fault, or my parents' fault for giving me these genetics. And so it does decrease blame. But what I've seen, and some of the research that we're doing now supports this, is that it almost takes too much blame away, that we all of a sudden don't have any responsibility for overcoming these things. That it's completely out of my hands, and that's the downside. Was one of the downsides for emphasizing these neurobiological and genetic factors. In practice, it's funny because it's not like I meet with a patient and I say, so what do you think? Do you think this is a chemical imbalance? We're not talking about that. What we might probe about, so what do you think's going on here? What do you think has contributed to something like your depression? And I will say that nowadays it's relatively few people that I see in the outpatient setting that will say, oh, I definitely have a chemical imbalance. But I think there's more like these kind of intuitive, murky background beliefs that are happening. Like, folks assume that there is a chemical imbalance happening, but that's not top of mind necessarily. I will say that some people come out and say, oh, it's definitely a chemical imbalance. I have a neurological genetic disorder. I've been told that by my doctors that I have a genetic disorder. And when I'm feeling a little smarmy and snarky, I'll say, oh, okay, did you get a blood test for that? And inevitably patients will say, yes, I actually did get a blood test. And I say, oh, okay, what did it show? Nothing. It didn't show anything. All my levels were normal. And isn't that fascinating? So how do we hold on to these two things, that the tests are showing one thing and this framework is showing a completely different understanding of what's contributing to your distress? And I do all of this in therapy, at least, to really get an understanding of, does the patient think that they can do something about this? Or how much does a patient think they can do something about this? And, I've had a few patients that are so convinced that it's a chemical imbalance that they just need to find the right medicine before they can really engage in therapy. And I do exposure therapy for things like obsessive compulsive disorder. So it's all therapy, it's all learning skills. And fighting up against that belief that it's just, I need to find the right medicine, I need to do this. And they've trialed dozens of medications and none of them have really changed things. So it becomes a little, there's some tension that comes up there with how much of this can be improved upon by skills and learning versus finding the right medication.
Right. I wonder if there's also like a sunk cost fallacy coming in there. If you've gone through 10 medications and so many practitioners have said, oh, well, we need to try another one. Oh, we'll find the right balance. And then you think that's the right way. And to accept that, oh no, this is, like I should change my job, or I need to move out of my house, or whatever exactly it is that, that's kind of implies that you've been going wrong and you've wasted all this time. And a lot of the people that you see, advocates online who are very anti-psychiatry, which I get that you're not on most people in the kind of the fields that I work in are not quite not as fervently anti-psychiatry as many of the people who've spent decades kind of going from psychiatrist to psychiatrist and being given pills and they've had side effects and nothing's ever helped. And then eventually they realize, oh no, I just needed, I needed to change my life, or I needed to, engage in some kind of therapy or inner work or whatever. And those are the people who really feel angry because they've been kind of pushed around. But as you said, the psychiatrists also don't know that. I mean, everyone's trying to help, right? Like, and then a lot of people do think that the drugs are the way to help, and it's the tools we have, which is why studies such as yours, which kind of prove that there's at least some kind of clinical benefit to, well, potentially, that's not exactly what you found, but there's a pathway to benefit. Could be one of the things that helps convince psychiatrists to take more of and clinical psychologists and everyone to take a more functional perspective. I'm wondering, so I noticed this, and this is something I've talked to American colleagues about, but when going through the study, it was a large online study, about 400 participants, randomized between either a kind of biopsychosocial explanation, so talking about how environments and genes and kind of cognitive processes add up to depressive states, which is what we might say is the norm and what everyone talks about in mainstream at the moment. And then you compare it with the functional perspective, which is, depression is a functional signal. Often when there's something in your life that's going wrong, then it's, like many of your emotions, like sadness and happiness, depression arises to tell you to change your life. I did notice that you don't use the evolutionary word at all, and I've talked to Americans about this specifically. It seems quite an American thing, and I don't know if that's because where do you sit on using evolutionary explanations, and if that's because you think a significant proportion of your participants will just be anti-evolution, or whether you think it's not necessary, or I don't know. Some of the most prominent evolutionary psychiatrists will tailor their wording to talk about functional capacities and adaptive responsive without talking about whatever the theory of evolution by natural selection. I'm just wondering how much you thought about that, or where you stand here.
Great observation, and it's really interesting that this comes up a lot. I have no hesitation in talking about evolution with my patients directly and in group settings. I often invoke evolutionary concepts, especially when we think about fear and anger and sadness as evolved emotions that are telling us things that are important to survival. And I talk about that with depression in clinical settings. For this study and for a subsequent study that we're working on right now, we don't invoke the word evolution. And that was more of a methodological choice, because we don't want to lose anybody in technical details. We wanted this message to be, at least for this first blush, this first study of framing this as a signal, we want it to be palatable and understandable to the most folks. And we can talk about this later too, but these studies are hard to do, and there are and hard, in some ways hard to interpret because there's a lot that goes into these messages, and I don't always know like what people are picking up on these messages, especially these online studies where we can't interview people afterward. But that's really the only reason that we didn't use specific evolutionary concepts in that study.
Okay, just to simplify it. Yeah, and so maybe a little bit more onto the study, which I can highly recommend everyone to read if you read these sorts of studies and you're interested. But it's a great, it's wonderful, and I think so. You need to be congratulated on a couple of fronts. One is that you registered everything, and you were very it was really like a great example of what science should be doing now, and what people who are aware of the replication crisis in psychology should be very aware of, because you could have sat there and not pre-registered it and then fish through the results to p-hack and to kind of find some pretty story that you can conjure up. But you did everything by the book, and it was really that was really cool to see. So well done for that. That was really cool. And one of the side effects of that is that you, like, of the 4 or so scales that you were kind of testing, or maybe it was 6. It was 6, but then so you found positive results in the pre-registered effects for 2 of them. One was the self-stigmatization questions. One of those questions is like how willing you are to talk about your depression or something like that. And then the other one was how willing you are to go out and kind of interact with people if you had this label. Yeah. And that was where the main effect you found was, well, okay, that was one of the effects. And then the other one was on whether the information kind of really changed people's minds, and whether they saw depression as a functional signal. And I think you called it the adaptive response. I mean, really, I should let you explain this, but I'm just...
That's okay. No, I mean, you're exactly right, Adam. So there's 3 scales that were significantly different between the two conditions. One was the self-stigmatizing measure. The other one was the adaptive beliefs about depression, which in hindsight was really more of a manipulation check. Like, did people listen? And if you listen to the content, you should have a greater adaptive beliefs about depression. So that was like not super shocking, but kind of a sanity check. And the third piece that we found a difference was on this measure of depression offset efficacy, the idea that my own efforts can lead to improvements in depression. We didn't find any differences in terms of how much people blamed themselves for having depression. That was really with a 1-item scale of how responsible do you think you are for having depression in the first place. We call that onset responsibility. We didn't see any effects on treatment attitudes. So there's no differences whether you got the signal condition or the disease framing. The biopsychosocial disease framing, there was no differences in like how likely do you think you would seek treatment. So this was my first time pre-registering a study, and I've pre-registered almost all of my studies since then, especially all of the experimental studies I've done. I can't recommend it enough to any researchers out there. It takes a lot of work up front, but everything becomes way easier when you write up this, because these are the analyses I said I would do. So you do those and then you write them up, and that's it. And for me, it's really taken almost like the identity crisis that comes up sometimes when results don't come out the way I expected. It's like, okay, this is science, right? These are the findings that supported my hypothesis. These are the ones that don't, and this is what I'm going to put out here. And that I've loved pre-registering studies since then. And so this is my first go at it, and I think it was really helpful for this particular paper. It's interesting. I feel like I live in the land of very small effect sizes, and I've become comfortable with that. That's okay. The 2 conditions really weren't that different. The findings were pretty small, the ones that did come out, but were suggestive and supportive of, consistent with what we were hypothesizing, that, biogenetic messages can take away blame in some contexts. They didn't take away blame in this study. And I actually have we had a video in the in the study that explicitly said in one condition, look, depression is not your fault. It's a disease, just like cancer or diabetes. And in the other condition, we said, look, depression is not your fault. It's a signal. It's telling you something about your life. I think that explicit messaging is important when, if and when we roll out this signal framework, that explicitly saying, this is not anybody's fault. This is not your fault. This is your body doing its thing. You know, it evolved to tell you important things that are going on if you have some unmet need. I think we're getting it away. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you, I was wondering if you were a little bit like disappointed, or if you were predicting bigger results. And I mean, it's also hard, right? Because it's online study and there's online participants and they're not in the clinic with you. And my intuition, although I am incredibly biased, is that, you know, there would be bigger results across many areas of life that you would find from the functional explanation, and that you've picked, you know, one little cherry that you could find, but it's because you have to control it in all these ways, and it's a weird sample, and you've been mentioning you're planning more of this research, which is super cool. Thank you. I'm also doing stuff. I'm in my postdoc. I'll be doing stuff in Cambridge, looking at autism and the effects of evolutionary explanations on stigmatization and integration of autism. And also working with various other people to test this in different areas of life and with different disorders. I mean, I think there's so much we can do to say, hey guys, you know, lots of people will be helped by thinking about psychiatry in a different way. What do you think about the future here? Like, how are you going to kind of keep going? What's the plan?
Yeah. So we are currently in the middle of a revision for a paper that we've tried to replicate and extend our initial findings. And so we changed a lot to the protocol, but it was a similar design. We used the same Dynata website to recruit folks from the community. These were all American participants. And we had an actress actually play Dr. Schroder. So it wasn't me. And, you know, that came out of a reviewer comment in our first paper that was, well, Hans, aren't you a little biased? Wouldn't you be more convincing with the signal framing versus the disease framing? And our ratings showed that wasn't the case, that participants found both videos equally credible. So we had an actress play me. We actually took away the blame video. That was another reviewer critique. I've learned, don't always listen to the reviewers. Because I think that's actually a really important piece to the framing message. So you know, and we kind of doubled down on the genetic. It's a genetic disease. All diseases involve a biochemical breakdown. We kind of shied away from the biopsychosocial model, and really for the genetic framing, we really doubled down on the genetic disorder part, dysfunction part. And we changed a few things about the signal framing. And it's really interesting. Our findings, so we had 17 outcomes this time. We pre-registered it. We actually pre-registered the use of a statistical correction procedure. If you're going to use that many statistical tests, we want to make sure that any significant findings aren't coming due to chance. And Adam, you know, it's really interesting. 12 out of 17 outcomes, not statistically different between the two conditions. And including depression offset efficacy. So we didn't replicate that. And we did find that the biogenetic disease framing reduced personal blame, reduced other people blaming someone for having depression, also led to the belief that people would think, less of the belief that people would think negatively of you. So basically, it's not a character flaw. It's not your fault if you just learn that depression's a biogenetic disease. But we did find in one of the outcomes, and this survived the statistical procedure, that people thought that this would not be that long-term treatment would be necessary to overcome it if they viewed the signal framing. So
interesting.
Yeah, so it is interesting. Plus, we did a few things in the design. When it gets published, we can talk more about it. But or you could read more about it. But we targeted family members of people who had been diagnosed with depression, we kind of did this. This comes from the growth mindset literature. It's called a stealthy intervention, where we framed this all as, imagine your family members are about to watch these materials, but we were really probing participants' own attitudes about depression. So it's not a direct replication. We tried a few different things, and honestly, most of the outcomes are pretty similar between the two conditions. One thing was interesting. In this study, participants found the signal condition to be less credible, more difficult to understand, less agreeable, and less familiar than the biogenetic condition. Those were all statistically significant between the conditions. However, almost all participants on the whole found both of them pretty credible. We're talking, 93% of the sample found that this is a credible explanation, even regardless of the framing, the signal framing or the disease framing. So I know it's a lot to unpack, and in some ways is different than our original study. But again, this is why pre-registering the study ahead of time is so useful, because we can really dig down and say, what are some of the boundary conditions we have, and for the signal framing. And again, all the effects are rather small. The effect sizes are pretty small.
Yeah. There's so many angles. There's so many angles in which you can take this, right? Like the people who've just been diagnosed and are in a mental hospital, the parents, the family members, the teachers, or the social workers. Like there's so many of us who have like living with mental health in all sorts of ways, and people we love, but we're dealing with it in our professions. And to be fair, I mean, if a single intervention of 5-minute video or whatever it is can actually do anything, then it's actually quite remarkable. Really what you want to do is take a whole school or hospital and then start making sure that all the patients who come through and who come back, and then all the practitioners are giving this kind of framing, and this is impossible to actually do experimentally, but also when they go home and they read about their condition online and they go on Mayo Clinic, then they read something, we're so enmeshed in this biogenetic paradigm that like if a single education session can actually change anything positively, that would be that's amazing. But I do think that it's going to be more of a kind of holistic across the board thing. But it's important to show that there's some effect early on, which is why it's great that you're doing it.
Yeah, and I mean, this is what I meant earlier. Like, this stuff is really hard to study scientifically. It's because I think what you just said, we are at least, particularly in the United States, totally enmeshed with the biogenetic framing. I mean, it's everywhere. Part of this paper is looking up different campaigns that have been used to educate the public about depression, especially in the 80s and 90s, and all of them use this disease like any other framing, and it's all doubling down on biogenetics. So everyone's been exposed to these. I don't know if you're old enough to remember the old Zoloft commercial, which talks about depression as a chemical imbalance, but those were incredibly successful and extremely popular. I'm
not old enough. Sorry, I'm not old enough or American enough. Actually, that was like, it's a very American.
That's really probably the question. Yeah.
No other society has beamed this stuff. However, I do.
That's true. Yeah, because you don't have direct to consumer advertising. That's right. Yeah.
No one. I mean, it comes through basically newspapers. The chemical imbalance stuff is talked about in newspapers and in mainstream media and by doctors. But I know the exact commercial. It's the little blob that's bouncing along with a cloud of rain over. It's like, sometimes you feel depressed, and then it shows you little very crude drawings of a serotonin transporter, and like it's a bloop 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 bloop. The serotonin.
Exactly, that's the one. And the tagline of that, the end of the commercial was, depression. When you know what's going wrong, you know how to make it right. And it's just an amazing ending to like, we know that this is what's happening. Yeah. So to your point earlier, that there's so many different angles you could take this. We've just finished data collection on designing a self-administered intervention to teach patients that depression is a signal. And so what we did is we used a it's called the user-centered design study. So we developed, the research team developed a prototype for this intervention where we walked through, depression. Actually, we can think about depression as a signal. It's telling you that something in your life needs more attention. It turns out that emotions are signals. Every emotion has a function. There's no such thing as a good emotion or a bad emotion. So we made a video on that, and we had patients think about, how do you know when you're depressed? And we prompted them to say, how do you know that you are depressed? An example might be, you love painting, but you have no interest in painting, or you can't get off the couch because you have no energy, or you find yourself, your appetite changes. And so participants wrote in, like, this is how I know I'm depressed. They actually recorded themselves saying, I know I'm depressed when, and they would fill in the blank. Then they did a self-assessment to see let's do an assessment of areas in your life. Let's look at your relationships. How are those working for you? Are your boundaries being met? Are your needs being met? Let's look at your values. Are you living a value-driven life? Let's look at your diet, sleep, and exercise. Let's look at trauma. Have you experienced trauma that really hasn't been resolved or processed yet? And then they chose which one might resonate with them the most. And then we kind of did a review. And so what we did in this study is we designed our intervention, and then we watched participants go through the intervention. And it was a 2-hour study for each participant, one-on-one. We Zoomed with them, and we asked them, what did you think about this graphic? Did this explanation make sense? How could we make this better? And then every couple participants, we revised the intervention to make it better for the next group of participants. And so we've just collected data from 28 patients with moderate to severe depression. And so now we have a patient-vetted version of this intervention. And this allowed us to get way more one-on-one interaction, obviously, than these online, one-time studies. And it was fascinating. A lot of folks said, I've never heard this explanation before. I've been depressed for 30 years. I've had meds for 30 years. No one's ever told me that emotions have functions, let alone depression having a function. A lot of people said, this makes so much sense, and I can identify what areas in my life need more attention. We also, it's interesting, on the Evolving Psychiatry podcast, we didn't explicitly invoke evolutionary concepts in this, again, to make this really digestible for folks. But, from that study, it's been really interesting hearing the direct feedback from this idea. We had one participant who hated it, and it was like, no, it's a genetic disorder, which was fun. Okay, that's, if you're living a value-driven life and you're doing things and you're in treatment and you're good with that, we don't have to change that. That's fine.
Right. And maybe in some cases, there can be many pathways, right? Like maybe some people really do have some genetic condition that's actually causing that, there is something in the brain chemistry. And if you looked at them specifically, you would find the serotonin imbalance that has been long hypothesized, but never really found in the rest of people. We can be flexible. We can say, okay, if you're really sure, maybe. I'm so interested about your clinical practice and how you weave it in, because often the psychiatrists I talk to, I mostly talk to psychiatrists, and psychiatrists are working with really severe cases of people who, and most of the time they have limited time and they just have to give meds, and they can't really go through these explanations. But, so it's cool that, from the therapist side, you actually get to talk it through a bit more. Do you kind of gauge? Is there like a moment where you think, is it standard for you to say, is there a functional explanation, or do you just kind of, I don't know, I'm just in the process?
So I will say I'm completely privileged to spend so much time with the folks that I work with, and I love my job. I love working with people, and I talked to a primary care doctor about do you talk about mental health? And she said, I have 1 minute to convince people that mental health exists, and another 30 seconds to talk about treatments in my primary care visits. And so you can see why chemical imbalance, that language, is so useful to quickly convey that there's something going on and it needs treatment. So I'm not in that realm as a psychologist. I have hours to talk with patients about these things. And so I actually work in an anxiety clinic. When depression does show up, it's usually secondary to the anxiety. it might not be as extreme. Of course, sometimes people do have very severe depression, but I do work on an outpatient basis, so they're certainly not in the hospital when I see them. But every time depression comes up, I will always talk about the function framing, and I will. This is kind of my sales pitch now. I say, you know, so I found it useful to sometimes think about depression as actually trying to tell you something about something going on in your life that might not be working for you. I think about the body and the brain 99% of the time trying to be on your side, that it's trying to help you out, it's trying to give you some sort of insight. I'm curious, can we talk about that for a minute? Can we slow that down and talk about how things are going for you right now in terms of your relationships, your needs, trauma, this anxiety that we've been working on? How are things going? And I'm curious what you think about this idea. And I always ask people about their opinions on this framing, this function framing idea. And I will say that for some folks, it's been really useful. They have really looked at things that we haven't been talking about in therapy. It's usually, I actually find most of the time it is relationships that need some more attention at the very least. And that's kind of the standard framing that I say. Depression is a signal that something in your life needs more attention. It's vague enough that it could be anything. And I always, but I've talked to some other folks that say, like, is it kind of like horoscopy? Like, this could apply to anybody. But as a therapist, I can talk to you about that. Like, what does come to mind? And the trick with all this is the changes that we need to make when it becomes like depression that's getting in the way are usually pretty big changes that bring up a lot of anxiety that we would rather not even think about. And so that's another thing where the biochemical framing, it takes that, I think you were talking about this earlier, it takes that heaviness, like, oh, I don't need to think about leaving my marriage. It's something in my brain that I just got to fix right away.
It's really hard.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, just some of these, the evolutionary explanations are like, often it's like, oh, there's something big in your environment, like your job or your house, or some relationship that you've been in for 20 years. And we don't have the flexibility to leave that as we did as a hunter-gatherer society often, where you can just change groups and everything's on a day-to-day basis. There's no insurance, there's no bankruptcy, there's no debt, there's nothing. It's all like, if something's going bad, the functional signal comes in. When I can next leave the situation, I'm going to be prompted to do that, probably quite intuitively. But I think people are quite rational to look around and say, oh, wait a minute, if I leave this all, I have nothing. I've been, a stay-at-home mom for 20 years. I don't have a CV that will get me a decent job. I'm stuck, right? And so, it's sort of difficult. Like, maybe you just take the pills and dull the pain? I don't know. It's a sort of a,
Yeah. And, Randy Nesse, and one of my conversations with him, and he said, well, Hans, when you start feeling trapped and you can't do anything, that's what depression is. And I thought, yes, that makes a lot of sense. That's why depression will come up. When there is a signal, but you've also come to the conclusion that there's not much you can do to change it. Or at least the thinking at first is that you can't do anything to change it. And I tell folks all the time, when it is about your relationships, I'm not saying bail. I'm not saying get out right away. But are there things within that relationship that can be addressed? Are there certain ways of communicating that even if it brings up a ton of anxiety for you, are there ways that you can try to change things up a little bit, try to set some boundaries, advocate for yourself a bit more? And the funny thing is, when people start doing that, a lot of anxiety comes down. It's like exposure therapy. You have to do things that you're really afraid of, but you might learn that it's not so bad. You can tolerate that, and it's not this terrible, terrible catastrophe that you might think it is. Sometimes it is for some folks in some cases, but oftentimes these are things that that we have some control over.
Right. So are you in exactly the same anxiety clinic that Randy worked in for how long?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
I knew he was in an anxiety clinic. And
so we didn't overlap at all, unfortunately. Yeah.
Right. Well, you have to take over. You have to carry on the torch. So I'm wondering, so the paper is about functional signals of depression. what do you think about anxiety? How do you, obviously you're seeing anxiety a lot, but in Good Reasons for Bad Feelings, one of the first anecdotes he gives is of a patient who comes to him who's been anxious and it's like, oh, I'm being thrown around from doctor to doctor. He gives a functional explanation and she's like, oh, well, thank you for explaining this to me. I'll process this and sort of understand my anxiety in a sort of more, whatever, self-confident way. Anyway, why did you pick depression for the study? And also why, like, how do you think about anxiety and these sorts of functional explanations?
That's such a good question. I treat anxiety, but I study depression. It's really how.
Why?
Yeah, why? Fair question. So I grew up in an anxiety lab, and as a psychologist, it was kind of like beaten over my head that, of course, this is evolutionary. This is beaten into my head. This is evolutionarily based. All like fear, like there's no question that this has to do with evolution. So it was never really like, I don't know, that different for me to talk about that. Like I talk about that stuff with every patient. Like anxiety, of course, has a function. And I think for most folks, that's way more intuitive than the idea that depression could have a function.
Yes.
People can readily understand fight, flight, freeze. People can readily understand how, fear would alert you to something in the environment that is dangerous that you need to respond to immediately. And in some ways, for research wise, it was like, yeah, yeah, I mean, that makes sense. What's gotten way more interesting for me from the research perspective is depression is never talked about that way. Depression is, even from the biopsychosocial framework, it's still considered to be a disorder. Even if we talk about psychological thinking traps and environmental trauma, it's still a disorder. But the functional framing is, let's stop talking about it as a disorder. And so one thing I just want to say that I meant to say earlier, I think from the messaging standpoint, what I'd really like to see is when you first come to treatment, or like you said earlier, like when you first read about something online, the first message you get is that, let's think about this as a signal. Let's think about this as depression is trying to tell you something about your life. Let's do an assessment. I'm not talking about the PHQ. I'm talking about your relationships, your trauma, your diet, sleep, and exercise. Are you actually attending to things that you're putting in your body, and are you getting enough movement in your life? Our lifestyle is very sedentary, and that is not helpful for one's mood, it turns out. We've got a lot of research to suggest that. How about other things? And if you started to address those things, that's the first mindset we should be into. And then if those aren't working, okay, let's start talking about therapy. And can we get hooked up with a social worker or a psychologist to start talking to you about these things in your life, your thinking traps, your maybe avoidance behaviors that are contributing to your mood? And if we've done a lot of good work, a couple of months at the minimum, okay, let's maybe start talking about medications.
Right.
Yeah,
Interesting.
It's the flip side, which just happens right now, is that you read about chemical imbalance and you go to your primary care doctor and you get a medication in the first visit. And then it's hard. It turns out it's hard to come off of those medications.
Right. And the side effects, and it's probably not helping you fix the thing in your life that you could fix.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm reminded of, I mean, I suppose it's different between countries, but the UK has, well, the West has a mental health crisis. The different systems have different crises of people seeking help and being able to be provided with help. So the NHS system is quite limited and was built for 20 years ago when people didn't talk so much about mental health and didn't seek support from a doctor or especially a psychiatrist, of which there are many fewer, and it's much lengthier to try and get an appointment with. I do think that just the psychoeducation aspect of like, oh, you type it in, you get some sort of functional explanation, and then you just, okay, now I can make the changes in my life, and see if that works, right? Just at that simple level, which kind of takes some of the pressure off the healthcare system, and maybe makes it easier, as you kind of found in your functional signal study of depression. Makes it easier to talk about, like, oh, I'm, at the moment, if I start feeling depressed and I type in, I'm tired all the time and I'm not eating, And then I say, oh, it's depression. And then there's like this moment of, do I tell people that I have this brain disease? And that's, it seems quite obvious that you don't really, it's not great, right? It's not something you want to talk to your friends about. But if you say, oh, my life is hard at the moment and I'm feeling, these moods, then, it's more natural, right? And like, maybe they can help you and they say, oh, okay, well, why don't you come out to this, this hobby group or whatever it is to try and kind of get you active or something.
Yeah. I haven't even mentioned that. The impetus to all of this is leading this depression group in a partial hospital setting, working. It's been at least, I would say, 1,500 patients over the last 7 years. It's a one-time group where patients who are already in like a day program, you come in at 9 a.m. and you leave at 3 p.m. and you go to different groups. And the depression group is all about the signal message. We talk about what is depression. People talk about, oh, I feel like there's a dark cloud over me all the time. Oh, interesting. Anybody else? Yes. And I feel a heaviness in my stomach. Interesting. And I feel hopeless. Anybody else? And then we talk about how the second part of the group is all emotions have functions. They've all evolved. We wouldn't have them if they didn't have some use to us. And then depression also has a signal, and that's kind of as a function, that's kind of the punchline of the group. And it's been really interesting. Patients will say, I feel way more normal now than I have in a long time. Like, this is my body's way of trying to help me out. That's normal. It's not that I'm so different from other people. And that's one of the things that those biogenetic framings do is they tend to they have this othering aspect to them. Like, your genes are different than mine. Your brain chemistry is different than mine. You're totally different from me. And so what I'm trying to do, one aspiration for the signal framing is bring us together to talk about these things. And it's way more understandable. Like, I've got some unmet need. Let's try to figure that out. So I love the idea of having this functional framing online and where people can readily access it. The trick with all of this is it's really hard to do this on your own, right? I mean, especially when you've got low mood, it's hard to get super amped up about getting into an exercise routine or changing up your whole, cookbook or your relationships. Like, that is hard. So if you have support in your life that can be curious and non-judgmental and actually helpful, sometimes a tough love situation is necessary where you're like dragging the person out at 6 a.m. to go to the gym.
Right.
But sometimes those things are really helpful, having another person to help you out. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. It's something that, you would hope. And at the moment, if I think that, my friend's depression is caused by a brain chemical imbalance, genetics, I'm like, I'm sorry for you, man, but I don't feel like taking you to football practice or, trying to engage you is going to help in the same way, because it's like you're fundamentally broken, right? Like, I can't fix your genes. I can't fix your brain chemistry. And it's sort of sad. I mean, I'm sure you know this literature as well, but yeah, some of the findings from the biogenetic stigma stuff is that, yes, you're less blameworthy, but you're also perceived as more hopeless and, and perhaps more dangerous, depending on what condition it is, like schizophrenia. You're less willing to be friends with someone. You're less willing to like be a romantic partner to someone. These are and friends and romantic partners are sort of kind of necessary for good mental health. So you kind of, you create these problems. It's super important. I wonder, I mean, there's so many studies we can run. There's like 100 studies we could run in different aspects, but do you have the intuition that telling people about the functional signal approach would actually lead them to engage more in life-changing behaviors? Like, they will actually go and do the exercise or change their diet more than if you give the biogenetic explanation. Because that's quite nice and quantifiable, right? I don't know. I'm just thinking, you take patients, you give them one of two explanations. You ask them, did you do this? Anyway, sorry, go on. Yeah, what do you think here?
Well, I thought so, at least from the professional treatment standpoint. But we now have 2 randomized controlled trials that it does nothing for treatment. In the second study that we're in revision, or we asked about medications. We had a description about medication. We had very validated, reliable measure of medications, asked about therapy, asked about professional help, asked about seeking help from close others. The professional help measured included things like a priest or a counselor, and no differences between the biogenetic condition and the functional framing. Again, with this kind of crude, developed short, like 1-minute videos developed for the masses, no signal there. We didn't, though, Adam, we didn't measure, would you be more inclined to change up your diet or exercise differently or do something? Those are attitude measures. I would be curious about that. I think we need to keep tweaking how we talk about this. And one thing we haven't done yet, which I would really like to do, is in some aspect, completely change the framing of the treatment to give it a rationale. And I think it's intuitive with the medication. You've got a chemical balance, here's a pill. You don't even have to say anything else. People kind of come to that conclusion, oh, this will even out the chemicals. With the function framing, I think it could be really useful to say, the reason why we would have you even consider therapy is so that you and the therapist can look closely at your life to figure out, because it's not always obvious, to figure out what is going on where you haven't had your needs met or there's some trauma that's been going on, to address the signal. The signal's there for a reason, so let's figure out what's going on so the signal's no longer needed. I wonder if framing it like that could help boost those people to get inclined to do therapy. I also wonder you could do the same thing with exercise or diet or some behavioral modifications, going out and socializing with people. I often say, like, look, we're a social species. We evolved to be in groups. We evolved, there are reasons why we need to love and be loved. And if you're not getting that, depression is going to tell you something's wrong. And so framing the intervention in the same like ideological framework as the causal explanation for why depression is coming up, maybe matching those two things might lead to some effects. But at this point, I'm skeptical. From my own data, I don't know. I
just think it would be really bizarre if the patient going in to a clinical psychologist or a psychiatrist and being told that it's a signal, and then working out what the signal was trying to tell them. And then, like, you should act. I mean, you'd assume that people will act on that more than if they go in and they're told, oh, well, it's genetic and environmental and it's a mix. But I don't know. Maybe most psychologists are kind of telling you that anyway. So, yeah. I
don't know. And behavior change is really hard. Like, there are so many things that go into actual behavior change. One of my doctors said, I was like, I'm getting a little bit of a dad bod. And he's like, oh, you just eat a little bit less. After he told me that, I was like, screw that, I'm eating more. So I don't know if that's just an end of one type of thing, but it's like those little clinical encounters. There's only so much that we can do to message these things. I think it's really, like we've been talking about, it's a complicated narrative that I think needs to hit at multiple angles.
But to your credit, to get the narrative out there, we need to run these studies to find some effects, and hopefully. So it's important to start there. We have to pick the thing that's doable.
And I hope that your study will, and I'm sure they will be, at a massive improvement on some of the stuff that we've been doing. So I'm looking forward to seeing those.
That's very kind. We'll have to wait and see. I mean, there's a lot of problems to solve, but I'm excited, and I should say, as we kind of wrap up, like it's super cool what you're doing. It's great, and you're pre-registering it. You're doing it. Yeah, it's a new wave, and so thank you, and I'm excited to see what comes out of it.
Thank you.
Do you have anything else? Do you have anything else you want to say? Any like things that you haven't covered that you maybe want to message the people?
Yeah, the last thing I will say is that what's gotten me even more interested these days is how physicians talk to patients about depression. And so we're doing a little pilot study right now, looking at doctors, not just psychiatrists, but primary care, OB, family medicine context, and asking them how they would talk to patients about depression. And it's really interesting that a lot of them say that depression is a real medical illness. It's a chemical imbalance. And it's interesting. We've got a couple studies looking at where people in the community, college students, older adults, where they're exposed to the idea of a chemical imbalance. And a lot of them say they're healthcare providers. And they'll also say, well, again, this is all American. They'll say television advertisements and media, but also the internet. And when we ask doctors, where have you heard about the chemical imbalance theory? A lot of them will say med school. They're learning about this in medical school, that this is a legitimate way of understanding depression. But some doctors will also say, I'm learning about this from my patients. So it's really interesting that we're all just talking about this and we're all hearing about it from each other. It's just everywhere. So one thing that I'd really like to do going forward is develop some sort of intervention for medical students and then residents to have an alternative way of pitching depression as a signal. And I'd love to learn more about the evolutionary specifics. And, you know, if it's, I would find if it's grounded in evolutionary biology in any way, those audiences would be really interested in adopting that to their clinical encounters. And so I think if patients are learning that it's a chemical imbalance from their healthcare providers and they hold on to that belief, starting it, you know, upstream with the physicians themselves and reworking how they're talking about depression seems like a useful target going forward.
Totally. I mean, one of the aims for evolutionary medicine and also evolutionary psychiatry is to just get into the curriculum, just somewhere, just give us a few lectures, just a little intro course. It can't be that, like, there's so much neuro, and people always complain that, you know, there's too much already in the course. So much of this is like not replicating well, and it's not actually that useful in terms of, you know, informing patients about their problems. Please, whoever's out there, if you have any control over the curriculum, just put in, you know, just a few. You need, I don't know, like 10, not even 10 lectures. I need 4 lectures. Give me 4 lectures. Just background stuff, and just to give people the background. Actually, we've run some trainee focus groups in the UK with the Royal College of Psychiatrists and trainee psychiatrists, just talking about where they think it should fit into the curriculum. And yeah, they basically, I mean, they were biased because they were coming to the training day. But yeah, they said, you know, especially very early on when you're just coming in to psychiatry, just having this background of, okay, so what is a mental disorder? What do you mean by this? And what is, you know, just giving some like, what are humans? What are the human species? Where did we evolve? What is our natural state? And, you know, what's going weird in modern societies? And where do emotions come from? Just some basic background that would, like, ground people, and then you know, can frame the rest of their education, and just sort of think about where the functional signals are, where they're getting exaggerated, where they're useful, where they're useless. It doesn't seem that hard to tell people, but yeah, it's a political problem partly. So
it is, and a structural problem. I mean, I do an anxiety disorder lecture for the med students, and just the amount of information that they're expected to retain and attend all these lectures, it's unbelievable. I didn't have to do that as a psychologist, but it's a lot. And residency is even worse because you're seeing all these patients, and time is a valuable resource. But I love those ideas. I mean, that would be so great. So yeah, whoever is listening, please start doing that. We need to start there.
As an authoritarian leader of the College of Psychiatrists, it's unfortunately these things are, they're political decisions, and boards decide, and the boards are mostly people who've never heard of evolutionary psychiatry. So yeah, we have some work to do, but it is something that I'm going to be working on along with many other things. And it's great to have your sort of work to back us up. You know, we need to be able to go. It's just such a missing piece of just be able to go to the psychiatrist and say, hey, it will help. It will make depressed patients be less self-stigmatizing. It's, you know, simple. Here's the data, and okay, it's not a huge effect, but it's something, and it's meaningful. You know, if we do this a few more times with a few more disorders and a few more contexts, I think that, you know, we have a good argument for putting more money and research into this. I mean, it's not like psychiatry has been particularly successful in helping people or finding out the true cause of mental disorders. It's been a massive waste of effort and money and time. So yeah, I think we do have an opportunity to take the paradigm and shift it slightly. But it's super cool that you're doing your work, and it's going to be an important part of that. So thank you.
Got a lot of work to do, but yeah, thanks, Adam.
Yeah, and I would recommend everyone to check out Hans's existing work, and also it sounds like his future work. It'll be great to follow up on. Yeah, and I will definitely keep in touch. And yeah, great. Thank you. Just thank you.
Thank you. This was great. Yeah, I really appreciate you reaching out. I'm really honored to have been invited.